Shalom everyone, welcome again to another episode of the Haftarah series of Hebrew in Israel. I'm Yoel Halevi, your host. As always, I'm glad you're back, and if you're interested in contacting me for questions that have to do with the Tanakh, you can email me at hebrewinisrael@gmail.com. Don't forget to go to Hebrew in Israel Facebook and hebrewinisrael.net as the website. If these recordings have benefited you, don't forget you can support me. Even small donations, they really just go for the research and finding books and buying papers if necessary. And if you want to help advance things, this is the way to do it. This week, we are in the Haftarah of Chuqat. Chuqat deals with the red heifer. And ironically, we are going to be reading actually from Judges from Shoftim 11. And the story here is a very, very difficult story. Also sometimes completely misconstrued by certain people. But yet also a very confusing story, which is why it sometimes gets misconstrued. So we are dealing with the story of Yiftach, a very tragic story, one of the tragic stories of the Book of Judges. The Book of Judges in overall is a very, very tragic book. It is a very sad telling of what was going on in ancient Israel at the time, and the story of Yiftach is no different. There are victories in the stories, many, many victories, but many of them also come with a very, very sad side of someone suffering or someone dying, sometimes for very, very silly mistakes. And this is really the same thing of the story of Yiftach. It's a very, very tragic story. It's a story of a tragic person trying to help his people after he tragically gets pushed away. He's brought back, but his entire life gets destroyed by him making a very, very serious mistake. Now, what's very interesting regarding this specific Haftarah is the fact that in most traditions, the story of the death of Yiftach's daughter is not read with the section. It actually ends with the victory, and that's it. However, Ammonites read on to describe the end of the story because, really, in truth, it's the end of the chapter as well. So why leave that part out? Actually, there's a very good reason to leave that part out because you don't want to finish with a sad tone. You want to finish with, oh, they won the war. But if you take that piece out, you lose some of the criticism, some of the very important criticism of the period. And that's really something that you have to have in mind when you read these sections, when you read these pieces, because if you take these sections out, the overall message is lost. Like last time, I'm going to be reading the text in Hebrew and then explaining what the text is saying. And the insight here is, I'm already pointing out that the insight here is a very, very tragic insight. Yiftach is considered to be a very low-level spiritual person in overall. His upbringing is very, very problematic. His life is very problematic. His speech, he gives a very, very powerful speech, which parts of it are truthful. But then on the other hand, he says certain things that raise eyebrows. And people read them and go like, what is he exactly doing here? So we're actually going to talk about each one of these little sections and explain them. So it starts open. First of all, we get the exposition. It says, Yiftach ha-Gil'adi haya gibor hayil. So Yiftach of Gilead, he lived in Gilead, which is basically the area of the Golan Heights and a bit south of that as well. And he was a gibor hayil. He was a man of great deeds. So even though he was pushed away from his family, he was excommunicated, he still managed to bring himself up on his feet. But the question is, what did it require? I mean, I personally know people who had to bring themselves up off their feet after very tragic stories and everything, but it leaves a lot of scars. It leaves a lot of resentment, and people sometimes even use anger to promote themselves. He is excommunicated. He's thrown out of his family, which adds more to the tragedy because at the end, he ends up either killing, it's not really clear, it's either killing or himself excommunicating his daughter from society, locking her away. So it opens up with his own tragedy and it ends with the same similar tragedy at the end of the story. But he's a man of great deeds, like Gibol Chayil. It's not necessarily Chayil isn't necessarily about war, though he probably is also a man of war. This is why they turn around to him and say to him, become our katzin, become our officer, lead us at war. And this is the motif of the book of Judges and even the book of Samuel. Who will go out and fight our wars? Who is going to protect us? They keep on forgetting that it's God that does everything, and this is why they're in this position. And Yiftach, by the way, is unlike, for example, Gidon or Shimshon or any one of these characters, or even Barak, who goes to prophetess Devorah. He's not elected. This is a very, very natural story. God gets involved in the story in a very, very ironic and very, very sad way. You can basically read here, this is them living in a natural world. God is not even interfering. It's human actions that lead all these things, and these human actions brought victory but also brought tragedy. So there's different messages being sent here. It says Vehu ben isha zona. He's the son of a prostitute. This makes him very, very low ranking in society. It's not a caste system, but his mother's a prostitute, which means, first of all, his father, big question mark overall, his father wasn't that great either. But he himself, but it's also an issue about his character that's being funneled in here. Now, it's not that the Tanakh believes in the idea of, a family curse that passes on from one stage to the other, but we need to understand that the person who's brought up in such an environment, there are question marks. Now, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the story of Tom Jones, a very famous book written in the 1700s by Fieldings. And the book itself tries to make the argument, and this is the age of enlightenment, so they're trying to promote the idea of people are good essentially in everything. And the answer is yes, human beings are good essentially, though we have inclination to do bad as well. This is what Genesis says. But we also need to understand that human beings can be good. But again, we can't ignore environments that people live in. So for example, a child who lives in a house of prostitution, certain moral principles are lost on them. So it raises a lot of questions of what real moral standards did Yiftach actually have. Like, for example, people who are strongly inclined to certain sexual activities will lose certain moral behavior. People who are forced at young age to participate in violence, gang violence, or terrorism and stuff like that, their mind is corrupted from a very, very young age, and the basic moral standards of being a good person can be lost on this person. So this is not saying, Yiftach is evil and he's a wicked man and everything. It's actually increasing the tragedy. He's excommunicated, and he comes from basically a broken home, in a situation where he grew up in a place that the moral standard was very, very low. So it's adding more details here to the tragedy. So it says, Vayoled Gilead et Yiftach. Gilead, by the way, Gilead is probably not his father's name. Gilead is, like other cases that we probably have in the book of Judges, Gilead is probably a generalized name because no one knew his father's name. No one remembered his father's name. So he just referred to as Gilead, someone from Gilead. This is not necessarily his father's name. And his father gave birth to him through this prostitute. Now, this also, by the way, raises the question about prostitution in overall. The thing is that we actually do hear that there was prostitution in ancient Israel. It was looked down upon, and the Torah forbids it. But it's very interesting. The Torah doesn't really give us an exact punishment for such type of behavior. So it really raises a big question. People have thrown this question at me, and the truth is we don't really know enough to understand what was really the moral code. But the thing is that we need to realize that the Torah was given to people who can potentially sin. The Torah says, don't do this, don't do that. If the Torah was given under the assumption that you're never going to sin, then what's the point of all these prohibitions? No, the Torah works off of the assumption that you can potentially sin, and you will make mistakes throughout your life. And this is why we do hear about the possibility of prostitution, about people having children through prostitutes and everything, because people did do stuff like this. No matter what you do, the belief that there's no man on the earth that sins, and no man on the earth that doesn't sin. I mean, that's really what the Bible really says. It says There's no man in the land that doesn't sin. I mean, this is just a reality of mankind. This is where we have the option of repentance. We have we have Yom Kippurim to cleanse the temple. We have all these things that give us a second chance, give us hope, as long as we try to better ourselves. It's a very interesting principle, by the way. Psychologists today are talking about a lot, that we need to take responsibility for our behavior. The story of the Tanakh is Israel not taking responsibility. And now we need to think about it, that we do need to take responsibility for our behavior. So it says, Vateled Eshet Gilead lo banim. So the wife of Gilead, now it's the wife. It's the contrast between the prostitute and the wife. This is verse 2. So she gave birth to sons. So the sons grew, and they threw Gilead out. They basically threw him away, which means that Gilead was raised at least partially. It doesn't really say that he lived with them, but he was associated with them, probably showed up every once in a while and so on. But the reason I say that it's not clear that he actually lived with his father the whole time, and actually want to say that he lived with his mother, was because in a situation, for example, of a concubine, we don't really know enough about concubines, but in a situation of concubine, the whole idea is that the man's name is upon the woman, and she has some kind of protection, but she has no rights as a wife, which means that the man has no responsibility whatsoever. So even a child born from such a situation is still going to be probably under the mother. Here it's a prostitute. It's even worse, which means that Yiftach was probably brought to the house a couple times. He might have become part of the workforce, so he lived with his mother, but he would come and work in the fields and everything. And then eventually, when everyone grew up and they looked at him and they said, "No, you're not really our brother," they threw him out. Basically, any association he might have had with them was completely lost. This doesn't indicate that he lived with his mother, that he didn't live with his mother. Now it says, "Vayomulo lo tinchal bevet avini," will not inherit in the house of our father. Ki ben isha acheret ata, for you're the son of another woman. They don't point out his mother's a prostitute. You know, they have to be very careful with the type of legal argument that they make, because essentially he can inherit. But what's going on here is they're saying you're not. They're ganging up together on him because they're the sons of one woman and he's the son of another woman. This is more of a legal argument and less about his heritage being the son of a prostitute. But this will be a way for them to make the argument, which means that it's quite possible that what's really going on here as well is that we got a little bit of insight here to how inheriting work was actually done in the ancient world, but that there could be the possibility of someone who's was born outside of wedlock, or something that's still inheriting, and they're making some kind of an argument that you're outside of the family and so on. But it's also quite possible that what we're looking at here is a completely unfair argument. No, there's a lot of details that we don't really have here, but what it might be is that it could be that that a person who's the son of another woman does not inherit. That might be the legal argument they're working off of, or that what they're working off of is not an actual legal argument. What they're working off of is a completely illegal argument, saying you're not from the same mother. Inheritance usually works through the father, so this might actually add more to the tragedy that he was bereaved of all rights, even things that he naturally by law was allowed to receive. So it says, verse 3, Vayivrach Yiftach mipnei Echav, and Yiftach fled from his brothers. Vayeshev be'eretz Tov, he lived in the land of Tov. So apparently that's it's a place called Atub or Tuba. It's mentioned in Egyptian sources as well. Apparently it's some land south of that area, if I'm not mistaken. And empty men, basically people who had debts, people who were lawless and so on, gathered around him. That's the term rekim, and they went out with him. The root yatsa in some situations indicates the idea of war. So they were basically bandits. So this adds even more. So he comes from a problematic moral background. He gets kicked out of his family. Again, more tragedy. He lives in a certain area. It's probably maybe even an area that's not really well settled, and he has lawless people gathering around him. It's basically creating a profile here. He was wronged from so many angles that the wrong people gathered around him. He actually led a group of bandits, but this is also very, I would say, shameful for the people who call him over, because they're basically asking for a leader of bandits to come and protect them. This is how bad the situation was. It's not that they turn around to Gideon, who's from a good family and he's loyal to the God of Israel and everything. No, he is a very, very negative character. And this has to be kept in mind because of what happens later on. But he makes a very interesting statement during his speech later. It says, "Vayimim," and it was throughout the years. "V'yilachamu v'nei Ammonim Yisrael," and the sons of Ammon battled with Israel. "Vayika asher nilchamu v'nei Ammonim Yisrael," and it was when the sons of Ammon battled with Israel. "V'yilechu ziknei Gilead," the elders of Gilead went. Lakachat et Yiftach meretz Tov. They went to take Yiftach from the land of Tov. Basically, they were seeking someone to help them. They didn't have an organized army back then, but there's a guy with probably several dozen, if not several hundred, bandits around him, and they can be a protection. Vayomer Yiftach leziknei Gilead. Sorry, I skipped. Verse 6. Vayomru Yiftach, and they said to Yiftach, Lecha vayita lanu lekatzin. Go and be an officer for us, basically a military leader. V'nilachama bivnei Ammon, and we will battle against the sons of Ammon. So the principle is that they have someone who can be a military leader, and they'll just join with him. Verse 7, Vayomer Yiftach leziknei Gilead, and Yiftach said to the elders of Gilead, Harlot atem senetem oti, for it is, for sure, you hate me. You have a hatred towards me. He's referencing back to everything that happened to him. But you threw me away from the house of my father. Why do you come to me now? When it's difficult for you, when tzal is you're in a tight space, you're in, or it's the word tzorer, to be under an enemy. He says, why do you come to me suddenly now? Well, but all the years that you betrayed me. So verse 8, they answer, and the elders of Gilead said to Yiftach, Lachen ata shavnu elecha, because of this now we return to you. V'alachta imanu v'nilchamta b'vnei Ammon, and you will go with us and you will battle for us against the sons of Ammon. They're not really apologizing, they're openly admitting, yes, we're here just because of this situation. It's kind of harsh. V'ayita lanu lerosh, and you will be a head to us, you'll be a leader to us. L'chol yoshvei Gilead, to all the dwellers of Gilead. They're not really apologizing, but what they're saying is, if you do this, we'll bring you back in and you'll be our leader. So verse 9 says, Vayomer Yiftach leziknei Gilead, and Yiftach said to the elders of Gilead, Im meshivim atem oti lilachem bivnei Ammon, if you bring me back to battle against the sons of Ammon, v'natan Adonai otam lefanai, the Lord will place them in my hands. So it's interesting, he is a person of faith. He's not completely detached. Anochi elechem lerosh, I will be a head to you, I'll be your leader. So he is creating a certain condition here. If we win, I would agree. It seems that God wants this. He understands that there's no hope from them. So he's putting his hope in God. He's saying, downtrodden and all the suffering he has, he still has that little bit of hope towards God. It slightly reminds me of, it's the whole joke about the thief that breaks into a house and suddenly he hears a noise and he starts praying, please God, don't let that be the owner, and please God, don't let them have a gun. It's a little bit like that, because basically this is a character of a person that's not a good place. So we need to ask the question, why is he saying this? And I think this is really the part of what's going on. There's a certain level of irony and criticism here in the way it's actually written to us. Verse 10, Vayomru ziknei Gilead el Yiftach, and the elders of Gilead said to Yiftach, Adonai yeh shomea benotenu, the Lord will be hearing between us, basically saying God will be our witness. Im lo chet dvarecha ken naaseh. If not as your words, basically a negative, it's really a positive. As you say, ken naaseh, thus we shall do. Vayelech Yiftach im ziknei Gilead, and Yiftach went with the elders of Gilead. Vayasimu ha'am oto alehem lerosh v'katzin, and the people placed him upon them as a leader and an officer. Vaydaber Yiftach et kol devar lifnei Adonai b'mitzpah. Yiftach spoke all of his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So Mizpah seems to be a ritual place. And basically, he spoke all his words. He went before a ritual place, maybe an altar, maybe even the ark, and he spoke all the words of the condition. He's not just saying his words, he's making his promise before God, I will go do this, but I need you to do that. This is the agreement between us. This is a very, very binding decision, that they actually take oaths in front of God to make sure that this is going to be truthful. That everyone's committing to their promise. So this is again kind of like that place where, on the one hand, Israel is with God, but on the other hand, there's a lot of questions of behavior. So it says in verse 12, Vaishlach Yiftach malachim el melech bnei Ammon. Yiftach sent messengers. Malach really comes from the root la'ach, which has to do with being a messenger, also same word for angels, to the king of the sons of Ammon, saying, Mali velach kivata ilei lechem b'artzi. What is between you and I? What do we have between us that you have come to battle against me in my land? Vayomer melech bnei Ammon el malachei Yiftach. So the king of the sons of Ammon said to the messengers of Yiftach, Ki lakach Yisrael tartzi ba'aloto mimitzrayim. For Israel has taken my land when Israel came up from Egypt. Me'arnon ve'ad Yabok, from the Arnon, from the river of Arnon all the way to the Yabok, another river, ve'ad ha'Yarden, all the way to the Yarden. He's actually pointing out the natural borders of the area. Ve'ata ashiva et hen b'shalom, and now return them back with peace. If you give them back, we'll leave you alone. By the way, very doubtful of that, because everyone was fighting each other for territory. So, give that back, they want more later. Because they folded back. History kind of repeats itself a little bit. So verse 14, V'yosef od Yiftach, and Yiftach continued saying more. V'yishlach malachim el melech ben Ammon. He sent messengers to the king of the sons of Ammon. So this is going back and forth, back and forth. He's sitting in Gilead, they go to the capital, or wherever the king is sitting, where his battlements are, so on. And they're discussing this, so the messengers are running back and forth. Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Ko amar Yiftach, thus said Yiftach, Lo lakach Yisrael et eretz Moab et eretz bnei Ammon. Israel has not taken the land of Moab and the lands of the son of Ammon. Ki ba'alotam mitzrayim, for when they came out from the land of Egypt, vayelech Yisrael b'midbar ad Yamsuf vayavo Kadesha. For Israel went from the desert all the way to the sea of Suf, and they came to the place known as Kadesh. Vayishlach Yisrael malachim el melech Edom lemor, and Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, Ayaberana ve'artzecha, I will pass, please, let me pass through your land. Ve'lo shama melech Edom ve'gam el melech Moab shalach ve'lo ava, and the king of Edom did not listen, and also the king of Moab was sent to, but did not agree. Vayeshev Yisrael beKadesh, and Israel dwelt in Kadesh. Vayelech b'midbar vayasov et eretz Edom ve'et eretz Moab, and Israel went through the desert and circled the land of Edom and the land of Moab. Vayavo mimizrach shemesh le'eretz Moab, and they came east of the Mizrach Shemesh, the east of the sun. Not just east, he's saying east of the sun, which is interesting. I don't know why this choice of words, but there might be a little bit of a poetic memory here or something. So there is a term, mimizrach shemesh ad mevo'o, from the east of the sun all the way to its place of entering. So Mizrach Shemesh might be just a term that they used back then. It's just saying east, the east of the sun. Le'eretz Moab, the east of the land of Moab. Ve'yahanun be'ever Arnon, and they encamped at the passageway of Arnon. Ve'lovao b'gvul Moab ki Arnon gvul Moab, and they did not enter through the border of Moab, for Arnon was the border of Moab. So he's pointing out that Arnon is not yours. Arnon is the border of Moab, not your border. Maybe he's trying to make a point here that you're sitting on land that doesn't belong to you either. Possible. I can't tell that as a fact. So verse 19, Vayishlach Yisrael malachim el Sichon melech ha'emurim melech Heshbon. So Israel sent messengers to Sichon, the king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon. So Vayomer lo Yisrael na'aberana b'artzecha ad mekumi. And Israel said, let us please cross through your land all the way to my place, the place I want to encamp, the place I want to basically go into. Velo ha'emin Sichon et Yisrael, and Sichon did not believe to Israel. Avol b'gvulo. He did not believe them that they will just go through his border. He feared it would be a conquest. Vayesof Sichon et kol Ammon. Sichon gathered all of his people. Vayachanu beyatza, and they encamped in a place called Yatza. So this is all happening in what we call Transjordan of today, very desert-like area, by the way. State of Israel actually has helped the Jordanians to develop agriculture, and the Jordan Valley on the Jordanian side is now green because we taught them everything. But if you go deeper in, it becomes very, very desert-like. So they encamped in Yatza, and they battled with Israel. So he's making the point of, we came in peace, you attacked us. Sounds a little familiar. Verse 21, Vayten Adonai Elohei Yisrael et Sichon ve'et kol amo biyad Yisrael vayakum. The Lord gave, basically allowed to be defeated, the Lord God of Israel gave Sichon and all his people in the hand of Israel, and they struck them. Vayirash Yisrael et kol eretz ha'emori yoshev ha'aretz, and Israel struck all the Amorites of that land, of that the dwellers of that land. By the way, the term Emori, Amuru, really means Westerners. So the Emori, reason, the whole issue here mentioning the Emori as well, is very important, because basically what he's saying is these were probably not the original dwellers of this area anyhow. They conquered them. And if I'm not mistaken, the book of Numbers actually points this out. So when Israel battled Sichon and took over this land, they took the land from someone who wasn't the original owner. So you are out from there. You have no more rights on that land anymore because you got pushed out. Israel came in, said, we don't want to take anything. They went to war against us. We won. We've taken land that you don't own anymore. It's an interesting argument here. Today in international law, they will argue this is not the way it should work. Okay? Somehow history counts for some nations and history doesn't count for other nations. It's a little funny what goes on today. So verse 22 says, "Vayirshu et kol gevul ha'emori," and they inherited all the border of the Amorites, because Amuru means Westerners. They're on the wrong side. It might be just a generic name, but it's interesting that they're not the sons of Moab, but the sons of Ammon. They're specifically the sons of the Amorites, which means that this might be a group that traveled from the land of Israel into the Transjordan for whatever reason. I mean, we know that historically, sometimes people moved into more what we call desert-like areas because at the time they were more green. It might have been a drought on one side, so they moved to another side. We do know that during the late Stone Age in the land of Israel, people actually moved to areas that today no one wants to live. Like, for example, in Gilead and other areas, though there's water there, agriculture is very problematic. But back then it was actually much more green. So it might be that we see a traveling in one nation to another area and they conquered them. From Arnon to Yabok, the area that you claim you own, though probably not, this is probably someone else's property, or it used to be your property and you lost it to them. From the desert all the way to the Jordan, basically the exact borders that he was talking about. And now the Lord God of Israel has inherited the Amorites, is basically allows to inherit them. From before his people Israel. There's no question marks in the Tanakh, but it's very clear. It says, and now you want to inherit that? It's not yours. It wasn't given to you. You either lost it or it was never yours, and now you're turning around to us and saying, we own this? No, you don't. So you don't really see the question mark in the text unless you actually insert it there. So he says, and he's continuing the question, verse 24, this is a very controversial verse. For it is that whatever Kemosh your God allows you to inherit, that you will inherit. Why is he invoking Kemosh? It's been so good so far. He's just he's only mentioned the God of Israel. Why is he saying, oh, your God, whatever your God gives you? So there's two possibilities here. The first possibility is that he's mocking him. He's basically saying your God is a nothing, and this is why you never inherit this. So he might be mocking him. But the other possibility is that he's actually being very sincere, and he's actually saying, you have your God, we have our God, and if your God gives you land, then great. That's your victory. In other words, it might be that Yiftach is admitting the power of other gods, which adds a little bit more irony to the story, which might fit into the kind of the idea I'm trying to present here. And he says, and everything which the Lord our God has allowed us to inherit before us, that we will inherit. So this is in verse 25. And now, do you think that you are better than Balak, son of Tzipor, the king of Moab? For he struggled with Israel, or was he able to struggle with Israel, or was he able to battle against us, or against them? He's basically saying, you have no winning here. You brought your biggest gun possible, which was bringing Bilam, and you lost. You have no way of winning this. Is it possible that Yiftach might over-exaggerate his abilities as well? Or does he trust in God that greatly? It might be somewhere in between. You'll be looking at Yiftach being a person who swings from one end to the other all the time. As you can see, there are a lot of question marks regarding Yiftach, and this is why concluding certain things about him is a little difficult. But if we take a theme here of irony, it's quite possible that he swings from one end to the other. He believes in his own God, but he allows the possibility of other gods. He understands the power of God, and he says, look, you lost, do you think that bringing this gigantic gun that you had of this magician, you're not going to win now either. He's pointing out historical facts, but there's a bit of a pendulum here, in my opinion. Possible. Okay? Verse 26. B'shevet Yisrael b'cheshbono v'ivnotea. When Israel dwelt in the Cheshbon and its daughters, basically Cheshbon and the satellite cities. Uve'aro'er u'ivnotea, and in the city of Aro'er and its satellite cities. Uve'chol ha'arim asher al yedei Arnon, and all the cities which are near Arnon, near the river of Arnon. 300 shana. It's been 300 years. We've been sitting here for 300 years, and now suddenly you show up and you say, this is mine. How can you make that argument? Why did you not show up and try to save them at that time? You've been basically sitting for the last 300 years waiting, and now suddenly you care? So he's basically saying your argument is not a true argument. Your argument is an argument of a person who's either trying to make a point to his people. It might be that there was a revival of imperialism or semi-imperialism in the Ammonite people. This might be a king that basically might have run his nation into the ground, and they have no more natural resources, so they're trying to invade another area. But he's making this ridiculous argument that this was ours first, and now you have to leave. And he says to him, you didn't care about this so far. Why suddenly do you care? And I have to make a political statement here. Kind of reminds you of the history of Jerusalem. No one in the Arab world cared about Jerusalem until Israel took Jerusalem and said, this is ours. Suddenly they all care. Suddenly there's this nation that suddenly cares, and suddenly the entire Arab world cares. It's reactive. Everyone's being reactive here. Very Mediterranean type of mentality, but what we're looking at here is a reactive reality, a reactive response to a reality based on either personal or political need, and not based on truth. And Yiftach is basically telling him, listen, history shows that you're wrong. It wasn't you who owned this land, it was someone else. We said we come in peace, they came at war against us. We defeated them, our God gave us this land. You agree with this principle of God's giving power to kings and nations, therefore you should be quiet. And if we don't take the irony element, he says, your God has no power here, no jurisdiction, and therefore go away. And this actually might be the more shining point of Yiftach. But one of the questions that some people raise is, why is Yiftach mentioning Chemosh? Doesn't the Torah say that it's forbidden to have the names of gods on your lips? And I actually looked into this because this verse has bothered me for many, many years. I mean, you have to understand that I was reading the Bible when I was 6, 7 years old. I remember coming across this verse, and I had difficulty because you read through the rest of the Bible and you hear the mentioning of these different gods. So the kind of conclusion I came to possibly is either saying that just don't use their names unless you have to. That's one possibility. The more plausible argument, in my opinion, is using their names in oath forms. Like when people say, "Oh my God," they're basically invoking their God in a semi oath form of either self-protection. It's like a little bit like magic or something, a little bit, or just basically a shortened oath form where someone's saying, "Oh my God," and then might be some kind of a condition that's implied without actually saying it. And that actually might be it. That when I've met people, Jews who kind of like yell out a sort of name when they get upset or something, or they get scared because they actually heard it from neighbors, and that actually might be part of the problem as well. Basically, invoking different names, basically through oath. So there's some questions here regarding what exactly is the prohibition. So it says in verse 27. I have not sinned to you, I have not done anything to you specifically. And you're doing evil to battle against me. To say, Shpot Adonai HaShofet Hayom ben Bnei Yisrael uven Bnei Ammon. May the Lord be a judge today, and He is the judge. So now he might be going to another point, saying, your God is absolutely nothing. He went from whatever your God gives you, you take, but we defeated you, therefore our God is stronger, going to the last stage of your God is nothing. So it might be that the irony theme here doesn't exist because this is him being much more serious, and the irony returns later on in the story. So the Lord will judge, the Lord who is the judge, will judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of and between the sons of Ammon. The king of the sons of Ammon did not heed to the words of Yiftach, asher shalach elav, which he sent to him. So it continues, verse 29. And the spirit of the Lord was upon Yiftach. Basically, he had the motivation to go to war. And he crossed the Gilead. So here we have the first time God actually somewhat intervenes. But when it says Ruach Adonai, it's a way of expressing the idea that he was encouraged and had bravery to do it. Could this be, again, an element of making the point of the pendulum, where on the one hand God is on his side, but then he, because of his background, swings it the other way as well? This person who's kind of conflicted all the time? Which might, by the way, answer a bit of the issue. If we're dealing with a pendulum, might actually answer the question at the end, which I'll explain how. So it says, so the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, Vayavor et Gilead vet Menashe, and he crossed over from the Gilead and Menashe. So you have the area of Gilead, but Menashe is a little bit underneath, apparently. Vayavor et Mizpah Gilead, and he crossed the viewpoint of Gilead. Mizpah Gilead might be an actual city, but it's a place that you can probably also see to a distance. Mizpah Gilead avar bnei Ammon, from the place known as Mizpah Gilead. By the way, Mizpah Gilead might be a fortress that they were able to see the border from. Avar bnei Ammon, he crossed over the sons of Ammon. And now the pendulum. So God is on his side, so he's now taking an oath, and he says, Vayidar Yiftach neder la'Adonai, Vayomar. And Yiftach took a vow to the Lord, saying, Im naton titen bnei Ammon biyadi, if you will surely place the sons of Ammon in my hand. So this is all perfectly fine, but now the pendulum. And it was the one, this is what's known as an anonymous subject, pointed out through a verb. The one who comes out, who will come out from the doors of my house towards me. And again, is he assuming this is going to be a goat or a cow or something? No, obviously he understands that this is going to be a person, because why would the goat or cow run towards him? Beshuvi v'shalom b'nei Ammon, when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, v'haya Adonai v'aliteu olah, and he will be to the Lord, and I will turn them up as a burnt offering. Pendulum, he swings all the way to the other end, because no one has any doubt who's going to come out of the door. People don't hold chickens and animals in the door in their houses. They're out in the field. They're out in the barn or something, or out grazing somewhere. Yiftach is aware of the fact that this is going to be a human being, and this is the pendulum. It swings all the way back. God is with him. He makes an oath with God, but then he swings to the other end and says something completely ridiculous, something he should not say. And this is a criticism of Yiftach. He's taking an oath that's inappropriate. In his mind, it's appropriate, but the oath is inappropriate. You have to understand that the writer is speaking to us directly through the way things are described. It's completely inappropriate what he just did here, and this is why he gets punished. And he says, I'm going to make a human sacrifice here. This is unacceptable, and this is why he gets punished by losing his daughter. It's completely unacceptable what he does here. And that's the criticism. That's the open criticism against him, because God doesn't want human sacrifice. We see it in different places. It's a theme that goes through different places throughout the Tanakh. The binding of Isaac starts off with us being told God tested Abraham, because it's not the will of God to have a human sacrifice. God says anyone who passes his children in fire, his seed through fire to Molech, is forbidden as well. Okay, we have a criticism that appears every once in a while. In Yiftach, the Spirit of God is with him. He starts an oath. He confirms the promises before God and everything, and then at the end, swishes all the way to the other end, basically ruining everything. So it says in verse 32, Vayavor Yiftach el bnei Ammon lilachem bam. And Yiftach passed on to battle the sons of Ammon. Vaytanem Adonai beyadam. The Lord gave him in his hand. So God's will that Yiftach will succeed here. But Yiftach still needs to be punished. Vayakem Aroer ve'ad boacha minit. He struck them from Aroer all the way to the pathway to Minit, all the way to the road, almost all the way to the road, all the way to the end of the road to a place known as Minit. Esrim ir, 20 cities. Vad Avel Keramim, all the way to a place known as Avel Keramim. Maka Gedola Meod. He struck them a great defeat. He basically ruined Bnei Ammon completely, almost completely. Vaikanu Bnei Ammon Pnei Bnei Israel. And the sons of Ammon surrendered before the sons of Israel. Now, from here on, this is actually a section the Ammonites continue, but it basically completes the criticism of what was done. God wanted him to win. This is the good side. This is the good side of the pendulum. But then the last part is the swing to the other end, because this is Yiftach's character. He can be really good, but because of moral corruption, he's also going to be completely on the other end. And it says in verse 34, Vayavo Yiftach ha-Mizpah el beiton. Yiftach came to Mizpah, to his house. So pointing out to his house, it's completing everything he said, linking everything to what he said. V'nevito yotzet likraton. Behold, his daughter came before him. The word here, hine, is the main text translated as behold. It shouldn't be translated as behold because it's introducing information. But here, behold is necessary because of the fact that it's really introducing something dramatic. Behold, his daughter came in front of him, towards him. Sorry, betupim uvimcholot, with drums or tambourines and dancing. Verak hi yechida. And only she is his alone, his only daughter, adding more to the irony. En lo mimenu ben ovad. He has no one besides your son or daughter. Verse 35. Vayichir oto otan. It was when he saw her. Vayikra et begadav. He tore his clothing. Vayomar aha. Yell out. He's screaming out. Biti hichreach. My daughter, you have surely defeated me. He had a victory here, but now he's completely defeated. Again, the pendulum swinging to the other end. And you were the ones who are ocher is usually a person who is an enemy of sorts. So you're one of my enemies. And I have opened my mouth to the Lord. You made an impossible oath. You made a ridiculous oath. So there's a certain element here that maybe the oath was completely invalid because he made an oath. As I say, the person says that he swears that if he does this, if the Lord is on his hand, he'll sacrifice to another idol or something. He made a vow that's an improbability, that shouldn't exist, or an improbability, and therefore maybe even invalid. But because of his moral corruption, or even maybe stupidity, he might have been even a bit of a simpleton as well. He goes ahead and does this. It says, "Velo chalashuv," and I cannot return, because the basic rule regarding vows is you can never undo a vow. Now, in rabbinic circles, they say, you can undo a vow if you understand there was a mistake or something. And there's even, based on that principle, there's a whole discussion about could he have gone to the high priest and get his vow undone and so on. But we have to understand that he made an improbable vow. You can't make such a vow, but he still goes ahead doing it. So that it adds more to the layers of the irony that he was maybe stupid enough to actually go ahead with this, even though there might be a rule here that overrides making such a vow. Vatomer elav, and she said, verse 36, Vatomer elav, avi patzita et picha el Adonai. My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Aseli kasher atzami picha. Do to me as came out from your mouth. Basically, sacrifice me. Acharech asher asa lecha Adonai, after the Lord has done to you, nekamot me'oyevecha ben Ammon, vengeance from your enemies, from the sons of Ammon. Okay? Verse 37, Vatomer el avia, yaseh li hadavar hazeh. And she said to her father, however, please allow me to do this thing. Harpe mimeni shenayim chodeshim. Leave me alone for 2 months. Ve'elecha ve'yarati al he'arim. And I will go down to the mountains, or will go across the mountains. Ve'evke al bitulai anochi ve're'otai. And I will go and weep over my virginity, I and my friends, I and my companions. So, there's no descendants, nothing. Yiftach's line is completely destroyed by the death of his daughter. This, by some standards, is the punishment of karet as well, that the person's name doesn't continue on anywhere. He is being severely punished here. God said, I want this guy to be my instrument. And God was willing to accept him as his instrument. But then by throwing in some elements of making ridiculous vows and saying things he shouldn't say, God punished him here. So it's obvious that this deed is unacceptable. And that's part of the irony as well. He wants to defeat his enemies by invoking God and doing something that he perceives as being good, but on the other end is actually something completely forbidden. This is an open criticism of human sacrifice, but it's also an open criticism of behavior. It's not Torah-like. Going around making Torah up, inventing rules and regulations which are not in the Torah, and inventing either beliefs or practices that the Torah forbids. And this is a criticism to everyone who does this. It doesn't matter where they're from. If it's not according to Torah, it's forbidden. If you're going to go ahead with it, you're going to be wicked in the eyes of God. So verse 38 says, "Vayomer lichi vayishlach otah sheneh chodashim." And he said to her, go, and he sent her away for 2 months. V'tilech hi v're'otah, and she went, and she and her companions, v'tev al betulea al he'arim, and she cried about her virginity upon the mountains. Verse 39, Vayhi miketz shenayim chodeshim, it was after the end of 2 months. V'tashov el avia, she returned to her father. Vayas lah et nidro asher nadar, and he did to her his vow which he vowed. I think he actually literally sacrificed her. Some people think that this is he locked her up somewhere, so she was kind of like a perpetual virgin or something like that. I think the term is perpetual. If I make a mistake, please forgive me. But she's going to continuously be a virgin, and she's just going to live in this lockup for her entire life, like a living sacrifice. But if we take into consideration the end of the book of Judges, where the Levite man carved up his concubine, and placed her all around the land and everything, like a warning sign and so on, we end up here with something much more heinous. So he actually probably did sacrifice her. And she did not know any man, and she was a law in Israel. Now, chok b'Yisrael, it doesn't necessarily mean that there was some kind of a law created, but maybe more in the sense that there was a saying, or something, some memorial, or something to do with the story, and people remembered it. It says, verse 40, or you can actually argue, by the way, chok b'Yisrael, this actually might be a mistaken division of the verses, that the verse should end, that you don't know any man, end of verse, and then it pushes to the next verse. It was a law in Israel from year to year, for many years. The daughters of Israel will go letanot levat Yiftach HaGiladi, to cry to the daughter of Yiftach the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. Now, it's also quite possible that this is something even more negativity, or something positive. Going, crying for her, repenting for the sin of her father, keeping her memory going, as also a memory to all of Israel to not to do stupid things like this. Or it can be something very negative. Letanot kind of slightly reminds me of maybe the crying to Tammuz, the hope of resurrection or something. That maybe some kind of a cultic reality developed around her personal sacrifice or something like that. So it's not very clear what exactly it meant that they cried to her, because what's the point of crying at a place unless there was some kind of maybe some kind of a cultic ritual around her, maybe the worship of tombs, which is unfortunately a very big thing that people practice today in Judaism, which is highly questionable in my eyes. I mean, there's a lot of criticism I can say about Judaism. There are a few things which are very, very problematic, but this might be the establishment of something very, very negative, or it could be something much more innocent, that they kept her memory through crying at her tomb or crying at the site where she was sacrificed. But I think it's very, very clear that she died, because crying is also a mourning ritual, which means that when people do this, when people cry, it's obviously because someone died. This is a very, very tough section to read. It's a very, very blunt, I think a very blunt criticism of certain practices. It's the irony, not only of the story, but it's also the irony of the entire book, where you have, Israel is good, then they sin, then they suffer, they repent, God saves them, but they go back to sin. And I think the story of Yiftach kind of encompasses this entire structure. This pendulum goes back and forth. The irony of the period, the sadness of the period, I think is encompassed inside the story of Yiftach. Yiftach being probably, besides the story of the concubine at the end of the book with the sons of Benjamin at Gibeah and everything, this is probably one of the saddest stories in the entire book. It's a story that represents how difficult the period was, and there's so much so much criticism that can be taken from this. And I think that we need to understand that reading these texts, we need to look inwards and see, are we making the same mistakes? Are we mixing God's will with negativity, with bad things, with practices that should not exist? Are we understanding the will of God correctly? Yiftach, obviously, to me at least, was kind of oblivious to things. So let's not be like Yiftach. Let's actually look inwards, not just work on some kind of tradition that we have or practice that we develop, but be critical of our behavior and understand where we might have potential mistakes and look inwards to correct ourselves. So I hope you enjoyed this recording. Again, if you want to contact me, you can go to HebrewInIsrael@gmail.com. Don't forget to visit the website HebrewInIsrael.net. You can also put a donation there if you're interested, and don't forget to go like the page Hebrew in Israel. Liking the page actually helps spread things, because most people, a lot of information is spread through Facebook websites. There are thousands and millions of websites out there, and my little website can get lost inside the feed. So if you go to Facebook, you'll be able to see updates and so on. But don't forget, you can also just put HebrewInIsrael.net on your likes or bookmark or something. You go in and see all the updates. Though I do put things on Facebook, the website is always much better than just Facebook. So thank you for joining me again. Kol Tov.